Is it time?
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
We'll know in a very short period of time, but it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good.
I see issue with that. And again, hey.
You're not going to be able to insult your way to the presidency. That's not going to happen.
I don't know who created Pokemon Go, but I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
I'm Ted Cruz, and my pronoun is kiss my ass.
So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to put him.
Not good. Believe me, not good.
Good morning, dissidents. Welcome one and all to a special Friday morning edition of the Do Dissidents podcast. My name is Keaton Weiss. Got a great crowd filing in here so far. 160 strong in the YouTube chat, 64 over on Rumble. That's beautiful for a Friday morning. We need the algorithm's help on Friday mornings. We got to wake people up and get them in here. So please, wherever you are, hit that like button. If you're here on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're here on Rumble, hit the follow button. But either way, give us a like. I think you guys will like this one quite a bit. We have a very special guest co-host joining us for this episode. Most of you guys know who this guy is. If you don't, you should. He's an independent journalist, YouTuber, podcaster, regular contributor to the Black Agenda Report. He's also got a Substack, one of the real giants of this space, Danny Haifong. Danny, what's going on, man? Good to see you. Good to meet you.
Hey, yeah, same here. Thanks for the very kind introduction, Keaton. It's good to be here. I'm glad to be. Your channel is not only great for analysis on things I generally can't even get to these days, but also you all have fun. And I think that's, that's the distinction that channels like yours and RBN have, is that you guys can have fun and be laser serious about and principled about what we need to be principled about.
Well, thank you. That means a lot coming from you. And yes, the left is generally pretty miserable. And so if you can have fun on the left, you'll stand out. All you got to do is loosen up and you'll stand out, because yes, the left can be a pretty dark and dour place. But I've been an admirer of your work for a long time. You've been around for a while. You seem like a young guy, but you've been out there for a while. So for those who don't know who you are, sure. Introduce yourself. Where'd you get your start? I remember you mostly as a writer back. Well, I mean, we're talking 7-8 years ago. So how'd you get into this whole game?
Right. So, and it's actually been longer than that. It's been about a decade. I started writing in 2013, submitting. This was a time I was in my early 20s at that time, and I was frustrated with the state of the movement. It was coming off the heels of Occupy Wall Street. The labor movement was in shambles. The Obama era was one of the most frustrating in my young history. And I know for many people, especially on the left, who are not drinking the Democratic Party Kool-Aid, feel the same. And so I was really looking for an outlet, a way to get out this frustration, a way to become more deeply involved. And so after a long string of just bouncing from organizations, trying to plug myself into movements, I decided I needed to talk about these things. And so I started to submit to Black Agenda Report, and that was a long-standing relationship that still continues. But these days I'm doing my own independent work more so. But I wrote for them consistently weekly for nearly 10 years, about 7 or 8 years. And then after a string of deaths within Black Agenda Report's family, Glenn Ford, Bruce Dixon, I decided to go independent, and I started to do YouTube more because during the COVID-19 pandemic, it seemed like everyone was watching YouTube already after the failed Bernie Sanders campaigns of 2016 and 2020. And it felt like there needed to be more voices, especially focusing on foreign policy that go against the grain of the neocon foreign policy establishment, the imperialists. And the Democratic Party was, especially those who came out of the Democratic Party, frustrated with Bernie Sanders, frustrated with the duopoly. They weren't yet prepared to talk about these things. So I was like, okay, well, I've been doing this for years and years and years. Perhaps it's time to try to interject an understanding of the world that is different from how even those like AOC and Bernie Sanders see it, because they themselves are, as and many now call them, war pigs, but they're imperialists through and through, and they don't really cut against the neocon foreign policy establishment at all. So I felt like that was a necessary intervention, and that's kind of what I've been focusing on for the last 2 years or so, especially with the Ukraine proxy war being on everyone's minds. Everyone's paying attention to it. You can't help but pay attention to it because the United States is fueling it, and the United States has a vested interest in continuing it until further notice.
Yeah, it's funny. When the Ukraine war started, it hit me like a ton of bricks how lazy I had been in exploring foreign policy for the past 6 or 7 years, because, as you mentioned, a lot of people came out of the Bernie movement, sort of not knowing where to channel some of that energy, not knowing what their foreign policy critique was, because Bernie never had one. As much as many of us supported him as a necessary alternative to the Democratic establishment at the time, he never really had a foreign policy that was articulated. And so I think a lot of people coming out of his movement didn't either. And I think that remains a real divide in, what has happened with that, Bernie coalition as it's fractured into many pieces. I think one of the main sort of fault lines there has been the foreign policy. Because, we won't get into talking about all these other channels now, but there's a real difference between creators that cover foreign policy and talk critically about the Ukraine war and those who pretty much ignore it. You don't really see too many of in this like online left space, touting Ukraine, but you see a lot of people just ignore it as if it's not happening.
Yeah, ignoring it. And for me too, because I grew up Asian American in the United States, and with all that's been going on with China too, I became really invested in understanding China better, and that also, especially when COVID-19 got going, became a huge hot point. And with the threat similar to what the United States is doing toward Russia, I became very invested in how the United States is fomenting a new Cold War on China, and that is also a huge blind spot. And for me, I take a position that for those who are principled, for those who understand and have a critical eye on the duopoly, for example, and are really pushing back against the corporate media, it's understandable that China would be a difficult topic because the misinformation about it is just absolutely off the charts. And at the same time, though, it's still necessary to ensure that there is some source outside of reading the New York Times, reading CNN, and of course, doing your own independent research that actually talks about this topic in a way that may make people angry, because it's hard to say even neutral things about China without getting people angry in America. But at the same time, it's so necessary. And that's why I do what I do. But one of the hard things is balancing, given the volume of information. One of the big challenges I have is there's so much information and misinformation to pierce through that it's almost impossible to kind of follow on the topics that you all hit on. So I'm glad that channels like yours exist, RBNs and others, because I honestly, it's impossible to cover it all. And so I'm glad you all are carrying that torch for dismantling and destroying the duopoly by any means necessary.
All righty. Well, we will get started with our segments now. We got a couple super chats in here. We will be reading them as we go, but let's do our first segment here. Danny, you mentioned how we managed to combine serious topics with some fun and perhaps even some comedy. And you did a little bit of that yourself this week. You retweeted this, which I thought was fun. This is during Zelensky's UN speech. Numerous delegates left the auditorium, leaving half the hall empty. But Ukrainian TV edited the video to show a packed hall, but accidentally showed Zelensky apparently listening to himself. So if we take a look here, here's the speech. This is Ukrainian TV, so there's no subtitles, obviously.
Забезпечити ядерне роззброєння. І це
Intercutting footage of the
хороша
audience.
стратегія. Але вона не повинна бути єдиною стратегією для того, щоб убезпечити світ від
All right, now if we look
І це хороша
once more,
стратегія. Але вона
we
не
pause it right there. You can see, in case anybody can't see, here it is highlighted. There's Zelensky in the audience watching his own speech, because it seems as though they edited footage of a full UNGA with what was actually there, which looked, I guess, something a little bit more like this. So this was part of Zelensky's trip to the U.S. He spoke at the UN. He also went to Washington yesterday or Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday. Met with the president there. But, you know, in prepping for this show, Danny, one of the things that you mentioned to me is that you were sort of tracking the shift in public opinion, not only here, but around the world, about the Russia-Ukraine war. And so CNN reported that Zelensky's mixed reception in Washington may be a taste of political storm to come. This was published late last night on CNN. The blue and gold flag draped hero worship of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's last Washington trip, which stirred comparisons to Winston Churchill's wartime stand against Nazism, was a distant memory on Thursday. 9 months later, Zelensky was back in town, and he and his hosts learned some jarring lessons about one another at a moment when a path to ultimate victory in the war against Russia seems increasingly distant. Zelensky got an abrupt preview of how Donald Trump's possible return to power after the 2024 election and how the ex-president's current sway over the ungovernable Republican-led House of Representatives could rupture the multi-billion-dollar lifeline on which Ukraine's survival depends. And far from clearing a new $24 billion administration request to sustain Ukraine's war effort, the chaotic House failed again Thursday to even fund the defense of the United States as a new attempt to pass a military appropriations bill founded against hard-right opposition. For their part, Americans glimpsed the sapping impact of a brutal war on a leader who rallied stunning resistance to a Russian invasion, but also shoulders the burden of months of death and sacrifice forced upon his people. At times, the comic actor turned wartime hero looked exhausted and unsmiling. In a CNN interview, he confessed the personal strain of his furtive life as Russia's top target. And in public appearances, Zelensky's patience sometimes frayed, especially when berating the UN for failing to protect its members from aggression in a U.S. capital that has undergone an ideological shift since he was last here just before Christmas 2022. It now takes more than quoting President FDR and drawing allusions to 9/11 to woo lawmakers. There's also a question of whether Zelensky's relentless efforts to shame the world into action might be reaching the point of diminishing returns. The pugnacious president might think so too, judging by multiple and poignant expressions of gratitude for previous help, as polls show more Americans are skeptical of aid to Ukraine. So I don't know if you got a chance to see either of his two speeches. I watched both, the one for this Security Council and the GA. I didn't watch much of his interaction with lawmakers on Capitol Hill, but from everything I've been hearing, it seems like they were much cooler to him than they were just 1 year ago. You've been tracking this for a while. How have you been tracking the sort of evolution of public opinion?
Well, in globally, during the UN resolution that was pushed forward directly after Russia's so-called invasion of Ukraine, we saw many countries, despite not going along with sanctions in the subsequent months, still voting to condemn Russia around this issue. Now, though, the situation is completely different. First of all, there's not going to be any more UN resolutions to condemn Russia because the war has, gone on and on and on. And it's quite clear that positions have changed, even if we just look at the G20 summit in New Delhi, the leaders' statement, the leaders' statement that comes out after each G20 summit or during each G20 summit took out the language that said that the G20 condemns Russia's aggression against Ukraine. It took out Russia altogether and said all parties must, come together and resolve the conflict and oppose unilateral intervention or something of the sort. So that in and of itself shows how much global public opinion has changed. And of course, we know that the vast majority of the world outside of the EU and the United States are not going along with sanctions. Even the European Union can't go along with sanctions and have had to get Russian gas and Russian oil through third parties, because if they truly did turn off the spigot with Russia, their economies would collapse. And even despite all of these maneuvers, Germany is in a recession right now, in large part because it has cut itself off from Russia. So public opinion worldwide has changed dramatically. In the United States, there's more and more anger toward the prospects of more aid to Ukraine, which is what is fueling public opinion dips here around the conflict. But still, because of the way polls are manipulated and because of how essentially Europe and the United States has created another kind of 9/11-like situation, many people will at least tacitly oppose what Russia is doing and buy into the propaganda. But I think what's most important is how the mainstream media, as a mouthpiece of the warmongers, of the neocons, of the foreign policy establishment, has changed its tune intensely. I mean, this is a massive shift in a very short period of time. If we just look back at December of 2022, when Zelensky was in Washington, he got a standing ovation. He was able to speak in front of Congress. The Speaker of the House was Nancy Pelosi, all of our favorite politician. She just dressed him down, gave him a coronation. Joe Biden the same. You had AOC. All of them were clapping and talking about how this was the war to end all wars. This is a fight for democracy against autocracy. No more. This time around, Zelensky goes to Washington and he can't even get into a joint session of Congress. There was no session of Congress held for Zelensky this time. Of course, Kevin McCarthy, as the House Speaker now, is in the GOP, and the GOP is trying to politicize the Ukraine conflict for their own purposes, starting to flank toward the notion that it might be time to hold Zelensky accountable, hold Ukraine accountable for all this money that's been spent. And obviously, that's an electoral move. That probably doesn't mean much, but it does show that there is a lot of fatigue, even amongst the foreign policy establishment around this conflict. And it's no wonder why. I mean, look at what is going on. The so-called counteroffensive, which started months late, it was forecasted for like 6 months before it even began. There's going to be a counteroffensive. It's going to end the conflict. Ukraine is going to win it. We're ready to fight. There was all sorts of back and forth between Germany, France, the UK, the United States. How many tanks can we get to Ukraine? How many weapons can we get to them? All culminating to giving M1 Abrams, Leopard 2s, et cetera, to Ukraine so that it could win this counteroffensive. Then it launches in June, and it's been more than 3 months now. And what has happened? Well, there's been over 70,000 Ukrainian armed forces killed in action. 30+% of all of NATO's arsenal provided to Ukraine has been destroyed or captured. And Ukraine hasn't even been able to break through the first line of defense that Russia had fortified, in those 6 months that they had to prepare for Ukraine's so-called counteroffensive. So it's failed. It's over. There's no going back to, well, we're going to progress and take territory no matter what Antony Blinken says. And so this has created a really chilled mood among Zelensky and Ukraine's NATO masters. They are feeling the fatigue. They know that they can't really supply Ukraine in the way that Ukraine needs to be supplied. Russia's outgunning Ukraine 10-1 in many cases on all at all levels, whether it's the amount of tanks that are out in the field, whether it's the ammunition and the artillery. Ukraine is just outgunned and it can't make any progress. So now there is a huge mood shift there, and that's going to come with action, because when you hear the mainstream media, for example, The Economist published an article just yesterday saying, well, it's likely that the West's support for Ukraine is going to diminish in the next year. And it's because all we've been hearing now is Ukraine's in a war of attrition, as if that was Ukraine's strategy to begin. Ukraine's entire strategy that NATO had concocted was, we're going to arm them to the teeth so they can take back territory and hopefully facilitate Russia's collapse in doing so. By taking back Donbass, by rolling through, pushing out Russia's military, we can then facilitate a political crisis in Russia. The sanctions were supposed to create an economic crisis, and together that was going to lead to Russia's downfall indirectly. It was all supposed to happen almost like a house of cards. None of it occurred. And so now the opinions are changing, because the United States, in the main, realizes that this is going to be a years-long project, as most of its proxy wars, most of its wars are. The United States doesn't have the capability anymore to, and doesn't have the political legitimacy worldwide to get anything done very quickly. Everything is a slow rolling disaster when it comes to its foreign policy, and Ukraine is no different. Ukraine is simply the most intense example of this at this point, and it's not going to go well. I think there was a package announced of like $325 million, pales in comparison to the $24 billion promise that was made by Joe Biden, which Congress, it's not looking like Congress is going to come to that agreement anytime soon. And even if it does, it's going to hold many kinds of stipulations that delay funding, that split it up, and it's not going to be nearly enough for what Ukraine really needs to fight back against Russia. It really is a lost war, and it's astounding to see Zelensky behave the way he does. One of the things that I always talk about, Keaton, is that Zelensky is a puppet unhinged. He doesn't behave like he should. But I was talking to someone earlier about, how back during the U.S. invasion of Iraq, a lot of people believe, well, Saddam, at least those who are critical of U.S. foreign policy, Saddam was our guy. We fed him all these chemical weapons and these weapons, and he was our puppet too. And then he went rogue, and so the United States wanted to take him out. That wasn't really an accurate analysis. Saddam was always kind of independent, and he did take U.S. weapons because there was a conflict with Iran. But at the same time, he was always an Arab nationalist. He was always someone that was simply independent and could at any time decide that the United States really wasn't a friend of Iraq. With Ukraine, Zelensky was bought and paid for many, many years since he came to power in 2019. The United States was funneling billions in support for Ukraine's regime, using the National Endowment for Democracy to cultivate a political class there that would be subservient and servile as they built up a huge military for the first time in Ukraine to conduct this kind of conflict. And at the same time, as the conflict has wore on, Zelensky has become a spoiled actor, for lack of a better analogy. He truly is someone that cannot keep his mouth shut. So now people like Jake Sullivan, Antony Blinken, Joe Biden, they're all angry. And Kevin McCarthy, for all intents and purposes, it's easy to use this as political leverage. Everyone is angry that Zelensky talks to them like he is the master rather than the servant. He talks to them as, give me more weapons or we're not going to win. If you don't give me more weapons, what's wrong with you? I'm disappointed in you. He will talk like this to his own masters, and that's creating a public relations issue that isn't talked about as much. It probably isn't the primary reason the United States is cooling on this conflict, but it is a significant one. And it's significant because we've seen the musical chairs that have been played on Ukraine's regime of late. Many different people have been ousted, from the defense minister to all of the deputy defense ministers just in the last month. And that is because the United States is looking at Ukraine's regime as a huge liability. It's massively corrupt. It's not effective. And Zelensky, they invested too much in him and they can't get rid of him just yet but Zelensky is by no means safe. So at any point when if this conflict truly does freeze and there's a lull period, it doesn't mean Zelensky is safe at all. It means that he is probably more unsafe than he's ever been in terms of his position.
Well, yeah, I want to play this clip because here at home, there are spending negotiations now ongoing to hopefully avert a government shutdown at the end of the month. And here is Senator Rand Paul saying that he will not allow the Democrats to force Ukraine spending into whatever bill they ultimately pass. Here he is on the Senate floor the other day.
From August, a CNN poll from August shows that a majority of Americans now oppose Congress authorizing additional funding to Ukraine. And now there are those in the Senate who would refuse to listen to these voices coming from a war-weary nation, and who would hold the federal government hostage by inserting $24 billion more for Ukraine. They're talking about saying, the only way government stays open, the only way we avoid a shutdown is by shoveling more American taxpayer dollars to Ukraine. They're going to link keeping the government open with more money to Ukraine, and I'm here to say that I'm not going to agree to it, and I will not let them shut down the government simply because they want to send more of your hard-earned tax dollars to Ukraine. Either the American people fund an endless war in Ukraine, or the uniparty threatens to shut down the government. This is a clear dereliction of duty, and I will not stand for it. Colleagues, as representatives of the American people, you should not stand for it either. The bill that comes for us should be about funding our government, not somebody else's government. I will not give consent to a bill that includes funding for Ukraine in keeping our government open.
So I think that for the Republicans, this is a pretty good long-term investment. By long-term, I mean until Election Day 2024, because what they see is polling for Ukraine support slipping, and assuming this does go on forever, as a lot of people, both inside and outside Washington, in the public and private sector, as we'll get to in a little while, are saying it might go on. It's likely to go on for a very long time. I think by this time next year, this will be an even more winning issue for Republicans if they take that kind of tack. And the thing that's just so bizarre about all of this is growing up, you know, you're a few years younger than me, but not much younger than me. But growing up, what it meant to be on the left was you had to be anti-war and anti-censorship. And now what it means to be on the, you know, quote unquote left. And I understand these are semantical terms. We don't consider Democrats real leftists or even like the Democrat adjacent liberals. But broadly speaking, left of center people in this country are now almost exclusively pro-war and pro-censorship. So it's just completely turned. Now, there's a lot of opportunism on the part of the Republican Party when it comes to a lot of this rhetoric. Obviously, Rand Paul is coming at this from a sort of deficit hawk point of view as well. He talked a lot about that in that floor speech. But it's still just astounding to see this kind of rhetoric coming from the party that growing up during the Bush years, you would never see this from a right-of-center politician ever.
Yeah, and it is important to note and to point it out, because it does show just how much has changed in the last couple of decades. I mean, we all were around, hopefully, during the Bush years that are watching this program. Maybe some were not, but now that I'm definitely showing my age here, and there's plenty of people, I still get astounded that there are people who were just children or not even born yet when George W. Bush took the helm. But nonetheless, I mean, we remember that time. It seemed like, at least in the way that politics were configured, that the Democrats were the so-called party against war, although many of them voted for the Iraq War. But when the disaster of Iraq and Afghanistan started to take its toll, there were many Democrats who opposed what was going on for partisan reasons. And that actually did lead a lot more people to hit the streets when maybe those who were left of the Democrats were organizing anti-war rallies. So it was a much different time. And then, of course, with Obama killed the left. He neutralized it. He destroyed. He was so effective in essentially selling war, selling austerity to what ostensibly believe themselves to be the left. And so the consequences of that now are the Democratic Party and the neocon foreign policy establishment are attached to the hip. Of course, Wall Street is a big part of this too. And so what you get when political conditions change is the Republicans, regardless of what their and I believe, I agree with you, Keaton. I do believe that this is partisan in many respects, but it really doesn't matter when you look at, well, why is this happening? Why is it happening?
Right.
Why would the Republicans oppose something like Ukraine? I mean, the Republicans historically have been the most Cold War infected, diseased political machine in the history of the United States. I mean, I wasn't around when Reagan was president, but a lot of people remember Ronald Reagan, despite all of the romance with him about maybe being the one who helped settle things down between the Soviet Union and the United States. And that wasn't actually true. He was pushing forward to a hot war with the Soviet Union while promoting the most crass anti-communist rhetoric. That's the Republican Party. And now you would think Ukraine would be the seminal project. And there are many Republicans who do believe that. But at the same time, even if there are just a few voices, it shows the cracks, and it shows that the political establishment as a whole, regardless of their opportunism and their reaction and their just, how despicable they are, warmongers they are, there's some real politic here that this isn't going well, that this cannot last. So why not use it as a political opportunity to get a one-up on the Democrats? And so for our purposes, we have to point out this, this divide, and we also have to make sure that there isn't any part of the duopoly outflanking us on any position. To me, that's just horrid. It's just inexcusable, regardless of whether it's the Democrats saying or the Republicans saying it. If you are to the right of that, then you're doing something very wrong. And you were talking about Democrats or people who are adjacent to the Democrats, or maybe even a little bit outside, not necessarily always being the left, to Bernie Sanders folks, etc. And I would agree with that. But there are many people who call themselves socialists and communists who say, I wouldn't support a Democrat or Republican, who still tout State Department talking points on any given issue. And there's a long history for why that is. There's a lot of McCarthyist infiltration. And also, there's just the fact that the war propaganda is so deep that even forces like this are willing to take up the mantle of the empire and try to shove it down our throats. And that's a huge problem. To me, it's one of the most infuriating ones, because it makes it difficult to even associate. And I see this now more and more, associate with any kind of term, the left. I think that's one thing we're struggling a lot with is, well, what is our political program and how do we truly define it? I don't think we should abandon the left necessarily, but we're going to have to distinguish ourselves and keep working on distinguishing ourselves from people like that, because we can't be. It doesn't matter how left you look. If you stand on the side of the CIA, you're not left. You are a useful idiot. You're a tool for the empire. No better than Bernie Sanders, AOC, and certainly also the political establishment at large.
Well, yeah, I mean, even in the so-called objective reporting, I mean, I read a CNN article a little bit earlier talking about how support is cooling for Ukraine. Even that was tinged with a sort of Western chauvinist perspective, right? It's just, if it's not on the nose in the form of like a Thomas Friedman op-ed, it'll still find its way into the text somehow, and very pronounced in whatever subtext there is there. So yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Let's move on a little bit. Danny, if you don't mind, I have to do a little bit of capitalism here while you're here and shout out our Patreon supporters. Thank you guys very much for supporting the show. This is our new scroll that our friend and producer Jake put together for us. You can go to patreon.com/DoDissidents and support this program. You get access to patron-only streams as well as your name up in lights here on the show credits. You also get call-in access to these shows. Program note, folks, Russell is in the chat right now, so his Wi-Fi is working well enough to chat, but he is on the islands off of mainland Greece where we tested the Wi-Fi yesterday, and it was nowhere near good enough to sustain a whole show. And so we are not going to be doing the patron-only stream tomorrow afternoon. We will move that stream to Monday night, so that will be Monday, September 25th. That's when we will be doing that. So just a little change of plans there. We apologize about that. And also, the other thing I apologize about is because Jake put this super fancy scroll together for us, I do not know how to update it yet. He's going to give me a tutorial on that this afternoon. But we do want to shout out two new patrons who are not on the scroll yet because I have not learned how to do it myself yet. David M. and Daniel C.L. So David M. and Daniel C.L. are new patron sign-ups. So thank you guys very, very much. You are what censor-proof the show and what make what we do here possible. So you can go to patreon.com and do that. You can also go to dodissidents.substack.com and join us over there. Alrighty, so let's take some super chats. So if you guys have any questions for Danny, you can put them here. Abiding, thanks for the 99-cent super sticker. We appreciate that, my friend. Thank you very much. Let's kill the scroll here. Beautiful. Alrighty. Wonderful. All right, my computer was heating up a little bit. I think that scroll was doing a number on it. I don't know. It's sweating. The fan's blowing. You can hear. I can hear that fan blowing. Extra Bulla says, again with the straight bookshelves. Oy, Danny, you watched the show. You know Russell had the bent bookshelves that he straightened out. Now you got the straight bookshelves behind you. So yes, stylistic changes over here at the Do Dissident show. Virtuoso says, if Zelensky is still in New York, may I suggest he starts panhandling on the subway trains for the Ukrainian war effort. Yeah, there's a lot of rich people in New York. You know, he didn't have to go to the UN. I'm sure there are a lot of very, very wealthy Ukraine-supporting libs on the Upper East Side. He could have just, you know, driven around, and I'm sure he would have gotten a lot of checks.
Yeah, no, even in my neighborhood, which is not a wealthy neighborhood, there are, of course, you know, gentrifiers everywhere, and some of them have bolted Ukraine, like Slava Ukraine, like that fascist slogan, onto the traffic poles, like the traffic light poles or the parking sign poles. Like they bolt them on with the, you know, using the same kind of material that you use to bolt on the traffic signs. It's absolutely ridiculous. But
so you're based in you're in
New York
City. Which area do you live in?
The up tippy top of Manhattan.
Oh, like Inwood.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, that's a great area. I love that's a beautiful area. It really is now.
It is. It's great, and it's, you know, it's still not fully gentrified yet, but at the same time, if you go up the hill, you know, you'll find a lot of Ukraine love, and it is ridiculous because, you know, it's not like Zelensky doesn't have a base or Ukraine doesn't have a base, even if in Washington. And apologies for that. That's what this neighborhood is all about. Right. Lots of noise. Yeah, it's not like he doesn't have a base, but the way he panhandles also probably wouldn't, you know, nobody likes a disrespectful panhandler. So he probably wouldn't find much success either, because he would probably start trying to lecture them, and, you know, that's just Zelensky, man. I don't know what else can we say about the guy. He is certainly an enigma.
Indeed. Pete Sweet is a member. Something wrong with the super chats? I don't know. Is anybody having a problem getting the super chats in? Why don't you all test that functionality right now? Why don't a few hundred of you guys just to test, just do a test it out, make sure it works.
If everyone gives $1.
Exactly. If it doesn't work with $2, try 5. If it doesn't work with 5, try 10. You know, just don't give up. It's important to keep troubleshooting. All right. We did have a patron person message us. I don't know. YouTube does censor these chats as well as the super chats. So, like, if you say something they don't like, they might block it. But we're over on Rumble too, and we have Rumble rant functionality up and running. So, you know, if YouTube doesn't like what you have to say, you know, feel free to go over on Rumble and put it up on a screen there, and we can read it from there. Rumble.com/do dissidents. We got 481 in the YouTube chat, 100 in the Rumble chat. So a nice crowd for this Friday morning, but we need the algorithm's help on Fridays because a lot of people are sleeping Friday mornings. This is not prime YouTube time. So hit that like button and help us get some more people in here. All right, let's get back to the program. So we started talking about support for the Ukraine war, both abroad and here at the U.S. This last bit, we focused on Rand Paul. The president of Poland is also softening on support for Ukraine. So this is from The Hill. Poland's president, Andrzej Duda, Ukraine like drowning person clinging to anything available. Duda's comments, which I'm going to play for you in a moment, come just days after Poland led a group of neighboring countries in banning Ukrainian grain imports. Poland has been a steadfast supporter of Ukraine since the war began and has taken in more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees. Public sentiment around the issue, however, has started to deteriorate, putting the ruling party in a difficult position ahead of a close October election. See, elections in most civilized countries don't last 3 years. They last a couple of months. So this is campaign season in Poland, and because public support has begun to slip, so has the president's rhetoric. The far-right Confederation Party, again, the right wing being the source of most anti-war sentiment, not just here, but in Poland too, apparently, is hoping to capitalize on the waning support in the country. Reuters reported that a recent poll showed support for Ukrainian refugees fell from 91% when the war started to just 69% recently. The same survey showed a quarter of Poles are against supporting refugees compared to 4% in early 2022. So let's hear the president's comments firsthand.
My jesteśmy tym, który ratuje. Jak jest tonący, każdy, kto kiedykolwiek brał udział w ratowaniu tonącego, czy każdy, kto kiedykolwiek uczył się o tym, co dzieje się w tej sytuacji, wie o tym, że człowiek tonący jest niesłychanie niebezpieczny, ponieważ może pociągnąć w głębiny. Ma siłę niewyobrażalną na skutek obawy osobistej, wpływu adrenaliny i może po prostu utopić ratującego. Chwyta się wszystkiego, mówi się przecież w przysłowiu, tonący brzytwy się chwyta. Rzeczywiście tonący chwyta się wszystkiego, czego się da. Trochę to jest taka sytuacja, jak dzisiaj między Polską a Ukrainą. Czy trzeba działać tak, żeby się obronić przed uczynieniem nam szkody przez tonącego? Oczywiście, że musimy tak działać, żeby się obronić przed uczynieniem nam szkody przez tonącego, bo jak tonący doprowadzi do szkody i nas utopi, to nie dostanie pomocy. W związku z powyższym to my musimy pilnować tutaj swoich interesów. To jest przede wszystkim nasz obowiązek i będziemy to robili skutecznie i zdecydowanie.
Okay, now back to the Hill article here. At the same time, however, Duda has maintained his commitment to helping Ukraine. In an interview with CNN's Jake Tapper on Tuesday, Duda reaffirmed his support for defeating Russia completely. Quote, Russia can be stopped only if it is defeated, and it will be defeated when Ukraine pushes out the Russian army from the occupied territories, thanks to the help of the United States, thanks to the help of the West, and when it regains control over its internationally recognized borders, Duda said in the interview. Only then will we be able to say that Russian imperialism was really defeated. So he did walk back what sounded like and what was interpreted by a lot of media outlets as cutting off support for Ukraine. They later said, well, that's not exactly what we meant. They're not going to be getting any of the new weapons that we take in, but we will still support them in some way, shape, or form. So this is not a situation where they're cutting them off cold turkey, but it is another situation where just ahead of an election, they're obviously seeing polling slip massively. I mean, a 22% slip in support for refugees in a year, not just to the undecided camp, but to the anti-refugee side. Anti-refugee sentiment was only 4% a year ago. Now it's up to 25%. That's quite drastic.
Yeah, no, I mean, this situation is complex. A lot of it is probably political in the sense that there is an election coming up. There is opposition to Duda that does not support more aid, more militarization, and also more refugees. And a big issue here is also this grain deal. So Ukraine is cut off at the Black Sea right now because there's fighting between Russia and Ukraine there. And so Ukraine isn't able to get its grain out through the Black Sea, and so has been relying on the EU and others to find alternatives, the EU and the United States to find alternatives, which is why you're always hearing pushing, we need a grain deal, we need a grain deal.
Well, that's
we need
interesting. That could
Russia.
also explain why they tried to walk back what sounded like a more anti-Ukraine statement, right?
Right.
I mean, they
So
can't afford to
Russia-
make enemies of the EU.
Right. So Russia's not going to support Ukraine's grain being shipped through the Black Sea because Russia is not getting any of its own demands or security interests met. So what's happened is that Poland, Hungary, these countries, they've been told, you've got to import more grain from Ukraine because Ukraine is, essentially an economic basket case. It was already one of the poorest countries in the region. Now it's just a complete and utter disaster. And so that has actually put a strain on these economies. These governments are like, well, if we import too much of this grain, it is going to destabilize our own markets, our own situation, and those countries aren't doing too well themselves. And so with inflation and all of this, and so they're like, no, we're not going to do it. And this, I think, is just another additional issue that the collective West is having around Ukraine. And no one wants this. I mean, it's junk, right? There's plenty of grain to go around. Russia produces a whole lot of grain. Ukraine is, not as necessary as the United States and NATO makes it out to be. And so when you make Ukraine a pariah state, these are the things that could happen. Even your best friends could turn on you. But also Poland is kind of a complex country too, because Russia has been saying for a long time throughout this conflict that Poland maybe wants to take some of Ukraine at some point. Maybe it wants, before the Soviet Union was and Ukraine, before Ukraine was absorbed into the Soviet Union, a lot of Ukraine's western territory was actually demarcated by Poland. So there are rumors that maybe Poland wants some of that territory back as part of this opportunism that has run amok out of this conflict. It's unclear whether that's even possible or feasible, whether that's going to happen. But there are a lot of suspicions that that's what Poland, especially its elites and oligarchs, I thought they want. They want to take back what they felt was theirs, which was taken from them during the Soviet era. So it's unclear, but I think the problem is, and the big point here is that when these words come out of the mouths of someone like Duda, they actually, regardless of how they act and whether they walk it back, they mean something, because what he's saying is Ukraine is a drowning person. I think it's worse than that. I think it's drowned already. I think Ukraine is worse than a drowning person, and even more dangerous because now we don't know what could happen from here when Ukraine being dead, how without any possibility for resuscitation, what will the United States and NATO do? How can they truly keep this conflict going? But at the same time, it means a lot for someone like this to say this. It means that there is, even amongst those who are supposed to be the most affable to Ukraine, they're not happy with the situation. They're not happy with taking it on the chin all the time just to ensure that this proxy war continues. And so I think we're going to see more of this, even from people like Duda, who are not. They're not good actors. They have their own interests, and they truly are committed to what NATO and the United States are doing. They just want it to be done in a way where it doesn't destroy them too. And I don't think that's unreasonable, but at the same time, I think it is pretty laughable when even in this moment where Zelensky's in Washington at the UN, he can't even get Poland to speak nicely throughout. The week he can't even get
sure.
Like, this is a country that has been trying its best to hide its own interests while looking like a true steward for Ukraine's cause, and it's just not going too well right now.
Well, that's an interesting aspect of it that, I hadn't thought about, because we don't think about it much. I mean, here in the US, even, on whatever anti-war left there is to hang on to, we think of, this conflict as sort of a global chess match where Ukraine is this sort of pivotal piece, and it's the theater for, more sort of global war, a global conflict. But as you think about the neighboring states, you have to also remember Ukraine is the largest country in Europe, and it is a resource-rich country. And so, a country like Poland makes sense that it would have interests that are narrower than ours. But at the same time, they are integrated into this network, so that they have to toe a certain line, also. So, yeah, that's an interesting angle. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think it's just the disaster that was the end of the Soviet Union. I mean, it's created this situation where NATO does its very best to mobilize these states, absorb them even into its infrastructure so that it can use them how it sees fit. I think now we're seeing how, regardless of how effective that can be at any given moment, when you overstep your bounds, when you take a step into a dark side that you truly cannot navigate or manage, then things can unravel pretty quickly. And so I think public relations and even just rhetoric these days can be underestimated sometimes, because of course what matters most is policy. But when various forces, whether it's Washington, people like Kevin McCarthy, or whether people like Duda start talking differently, then it means that something is going on. The reality of the situation is perhaps looking bleaker. Perhaps there are problems, there are divisions that are really important to, I think, to highlight, because they do show how this like all knowing, like all dominant kind of force that the United States projects with NATO is surely not as stable as it may appear on the surface.
Indeed. We got a question here for you for the super chat. Thank you, Rory, for that generous donation. The U.S. has been supporting Ukraine since 2014, and now Russia needs weapons from North Korea. Means war is close to end. Is there a benefit to ceding Ukraine's control of Baltic oil fields and Europe gas supply to Russia and China? Go ahead, Danny. Do you have a response to that? As I understand, Russia doesn't need the weapons from North Korea. They're just trying to strengthen those ties because this is a part of a new sort of multipolar world that's forming. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, Russia, even the Western mainstream media, just read the last few Economist articles on the Ukraine situation, and you'll see they cite themselves. Russia's got 5 million rounds of artillery on deck. It completely eclipses at the moment what Ukraine has by a factor of at least 5, and the United States and Europe can't even catch up for another year or two. And of course, nothing stays stagnant. Russia's not just going to sit on its thumbs and not produce any more artillery. So it's to think that Russia needs the DPRK, North Korea, for weaponry, I think is a little bit simplistic. At the same time, it doesn't mean that arms trading won't happen, because these two countries both have an interest to support each other. And when it comes to the DPRK in particular, I think a lot of the reasons why Russia and China, both of which have held high-level meetings, several of them in the last couple months alone, I think the reason why this is happening is because the United States is trying to form alliances in the region that threaten all three of these countries. So it's not just NATO encircling Russia, but it's also the fact in the Pacific, you have Joe Biden trying to create a Japan, South Korea, trilateral military alliance. That in of itself, it also includes Russia, because Russia holds naval exercises with China and the DPRK in the Pacific. So there are kind of a confluence of interests that come together for all three of these countries as why they would get closer. But at the same time, in the second half of that question, it came after that the conflict is coming to an end. I wouldn't be so sure about that. I think that the conflict might freeze. It might there might be a big lull period as we enter the cold weather season in terms of how the West supports Ukraine, how many forces can be thrown out, how many of Ukraine's forces can be thrown out on that front line to die. That may happen. But in terms of ending the conflict, Russia doesn't want to rush and steam through and destroy Ukraine, because that would be completely antithetical to Russia's goals, which is
it's never what their stated goals were.
It's to build. They do truly want a better relationship with Ukraine. They just don't want a regime that's completely compliant with NATO, and they don't want a war on its border. I mean, I think that's pretty reasonable. But at the same time, the United States and the collective West, as long as they're able to supply anything to Ukraine, there will be a continuation of some semblance of conflict. And I think Russia sees it as advantageous to move as slowly as possible so that the fissures and all of the disadvantages that the collective West has to deal with are more and more impactful on the battlefield, and leads to a situation where, there really isn't anywhere else to go, because the faster you move, then the harder it is diplomatically, politically, possibly even economically to sustain the kind of leverage that Russia has built. So it doesn't really mean, I don't think that the conflict is really winding down. But I do think we're going to see on the Ukraine side, on the NATO side, I don't think we need any concessions. I don't think there's going to be any concessions in the realm of what was asked here. But I do think that there's going to be many changes in how the conflict is talked about, how it's supplied, and possibly how it's even fought. And I think we're already seeing that. A slow war, a war of attrition for the Ukraine side, simply means that there's not going to be any push for victory. But at the same time, if we look at Syria, for example, the United States and NATO, they went hard. They were trying to get a no-fly zone, just like Libya, several different times to bomb Syria into the oblivion. They could never get it. And then Russia intervened in 2015, and it meant that the fighting was not going to be successful. But it doesn't mean that the U.S. stopped doing what it's been doing. It still supplies armed groups there. It still occupies 30% of the territory. It still steals Syria's oil. So a lot of the things that are happening in Ukraine are likely to continue, even if it means that Ukraine has no possibility of some kind of victory.
All righty, let's go to our next story here. This is connected, of course. Haifong put out on his Substack a report. Lockheed Martin boasts to investors Ukraine war fueling, quote, $10 billion of opportunities now to the end of the decade. Is anybody else hearing a weed whacker coming through on my microphone, or is it good? Oh, good. Thank God it stopped, because I could have gone and closed the window, but my neighbor just got a weed whacker going. I don't know what the hell that was about, but all right, stop for now. Good. Apologize if anybody heard that. Was it coming through or no? Because if it wasn't, I'll leave it alone.
No, I didn't hear nothing.
Yeah, cool. Thankfully, this mic is pretty good at isolating the
I can close the window and it doesn't really matter.
Right, yeah, well, yeah. In the city, indeed. Indeed. Okay, sorry about that. So he writes, last week, Lockheed Martin executives dined with bankers at the Waldorf Astoria Monarch Beach, a shimmering resort that sits perched above a seaside bluff in Orange County, California. In a presentation, the defense contractor, which produces a variety of missiles, munitions, and rockets, gave a sunny financial forecast for the Ukraine-Russia war. Quote, just switching gears to Ukraine, says Morgan Stanley analyst Kristen Lewog during an investor town hall with the firm. What's the opportunity? And Jay Malave, the chief financial officer for Lockheed, gave the following response. Lee not only wrote this piece, which I encourage you guys to go and check out his Substack, but he also included the source audio from this public conference, which we are going to listen to right now. It's about 2 minutes.
Switching gears to...
So here's a conversation he just introduced.
Just switching gears to Ukraine. I mean, in Ukraine, we've seen a premium in many systems where you're actually the market-leading offerings, right? And we're seeing that for missiles and missile defense. And these areas are where the U.S. DoD budget's up 20%, well in excess of the top line of the whole thing of about 3%. So we're seeing that outsized growth, and I think that, ties into what you mentioned earlier, Jim, on the portfolio growing in 2024. But you've also noted with that on Ukraine a $7 billion opportunity in MFC. Can you guys talk about what is in that $7 billion? What's the opportunity? Any context for program, size, timing?
Yeah, if you think about it, it's things that you have seen in the news, and just to clarify, we've seen what we have is a visibility to about $10 billion of orders between now and 2028. We see that what I talked about is $6 billion, that converting to about $6 billion of revenue over that same period of time. So there will be growth in revenue upside beyond that period of time as well to fully fulfill that $10 billion of opportunities. But where you see it is we've talked about these things, whether it's Javelin, whether it's HIMARS, GMLRS, PAC-3. PAC-3 is a good example. When we talked back in 2021 about our 4 pillars of growth, PAC-3 was a program that was already going to be driving growth, and that was bringing that the ramp up to 550 deliveries per year by 2025. We're now seeing that we can take that up to 650 per year by 2027 based on this incremental demand. So that's one example. GMRS, we were essentially at capacity of about 10,000 units per year. We're now driving that to 14,000 units per year. And so there's just, as you mentioned, whether it's replenishment or just capitalization to higher levels, the demand is enduring between, frankly, now to the end of the decade.
So those are, the great Bob Dylan song, Masters of War. Those are the Masters of War. That's who he's talking about. People who very coldly and very unemotionally talk about weapons opportunity, about, business opportunities, selling weapons that literally blow human bodies into hundreds of different pieces. Just absolutely ghoulish on that level. But in keeping with this longer conversation that we've been having this morning, there you have it, straight from the horse's mouth. The people who carry the most weight in this country and in this world, the people who actually have the politicians' ears, they're not expecting this war to end anytime soon. They're talking about another $10 billion through 2028, which tracks about with what they've made so far, 2.3. And they're saying this is going to carry us through the rest of the decade. And one of the things that Haifong goes on to write in the piece, which was a fact sort of hidden in plain sight from me, because dumb guy that I am, I didn't even think of this. But these weapons contractors not only have deals with the United States, but with European countries as well. And so a lot of the European countries who have supplied weapons, while those weapons may not be politically significant in the same way that our weapons are, since we give so much more of them, that's still money in the bank for these weapons contractors when they have to replenish their stockpiles. And so it's, raining money from the sky on these different companies, and as you just heard, they don't expect it to end anytime soon.
No, I mean, why would they? We I know you cover this a lot. This military budget of the United States and also of NATO as a whole. I mean, a big reason that NATO exists is to increase the military budgets of the EU countries and European countries involved, so that they will do what the United States does, right? Like increasingly rely on military contractors, privatize their defense systems, so that people like this, these corporations, these monopolies, these contractors can make a killing off of it. And that's what's going on. I mean, in 2022 alone, all because of the Ukraine conflict, all of these military contractors, the big top 5, they added $10 billion plus, each one of them, the big 5, in market value. And we all have been following the ways in which the stock prices just go way up whenever there's a new infusion of cash for Ukraine, and that's because this is a long-term strategy. It's about, in many ways, shoring these kind of forces up, making them more and more profitable, and that's a big reason why wars are kind of conducted the way they are, why they're more permanent ventures than maybe in the past, where wars were supposed to have a strategic kind of victory. That no, they're supposed to continue as long as possible. It's no mistake that Russia and China, despite the fact that there's probably no chance in hell the United States can do anything militarily against them. There's a big reason why the foreign policy establishment says, oh, yeah, no, we should definitely build up and work towards some kind of war. It's because that's going to take a while and it's probably never going to happen. But at the same time, there's these big five military contractors are going to make an absolute killing investing and preparing for such a thing. And then, of course, we can't also exclude BlackRock and the real giants of the multinational world capitalist system. Forces like BlackRock, they're the ones who invest in these companies, who basically own the vast majority of shares in them. It's these kind of so-called investors in big finance capital that pull the strings. You know, they're the ones who want to see huge returns on their investments, and so they're going to make sure that governments like the United States are committed to endless war like the one in Ukraine, regardless of the consequences. Who cares about Ukrainians? Who cares about who cares? I mean, people always say, oh, well, we should fund basic needs. They don't care about your basic needs.
Right.
They actually would rather see your basic needs be taken care of in a way where they can just make more money. I mean, one thing, I don't know if you remember Rahm Emanuel when he was mayor of Chicago as like the chief privatizer. He's now the ambassador to Japan for the United States. And Biden had to censure him and say, stop making all these crazy tweets about Xi Jinping and China. So this revolving door, I mean, this guy is ingratiated with the biggest banks. Yeah, he's the biggest banks. He's like, you know, he is a chief shock therapy doctrine kind of guy. That's what he does. He works for these kind of forces like BlackRock. Now he's in Japan chilling out on Twitter, just ranting and raving about how we need a war with China. I mean, this is how it goes. There's a complete and utter a unity in terms of how finance, how the military industrial complex work. They work together, and so we're seeing it here big time.
All righty. We're going to take a few super chats before we go to our next segment. I'm going to go a little bit out of order in terms of the topics that they cover. I want to get the Ukraine stuff done first, since we're about to leave this topic. But Eric Rousseau, thanks for the $5, says Ukraine is the new Israel. You must pledge your loyalty to a foreign government to be a true American. Indeed. Thank you, sir, for that donation. Martin, thank you for a very kind $49.99. Nerds, was that a test donation? Well, thank you. You can call us nerds for $50. That's no problem with that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, my friend. Courtney says, testing the super chat. LOL. Perfect. Seems to be up and running, working. This is a Rumble rant. This is regarding the Ukraine war, I assume, from Ernest Dowson for $5. Thank you, sir. Why are there not millions in the streets protesting? That's for you, Danny. Says question for Danny. Why are there not millions in the streets protesting? So yeah, I mean, we've seen public opinion slide, but we still have not seen any sort of anti-war movement take shape. We've had, you know, a lot of organizations do their best and put some rallies up here and there, but I remember during the Iraq War, in the run-up to that war, there were very large protests. Not large enough, but large. Here, you're not seeing anything like that.
No, we have not, and we could be here forever for all of the reasons that go deep. I mean, the United States hasn't had a strong anti-war movement, maybe at any point of its history, like a truly effective one. But in 2000, you know, and during the Iraq War, that was probably the high point of the 21st century. And that was brought about in many ways because the partisan lines were really difficult to maintain for a period. The Democrats had a hard time flanking and saying that they were truly an anti-war party. But when they started to challenge the Bush administration, that's when things started to weaken a bit, when there started to be more fatigue and they started to challenge George W. Bush and make kind of a public scene about it. That's when things actually started to weaken a bit. So I think what has happened let's just take the modern, like, why is it happening now that it's so difficult to get out on the streets around war? I think the culmination, I would lump Trump into this too. A lot of people now want to say, oh, well, Trump said anti-war things. That makes it easier. I actually would differ. Like, I would say that what happened was that we had Obama neutralize the left, and then Trump occupied a space that actually also still made it hard for the left to take anti-war positions, because what had happened after Obama's just onslaught of propaganda, the Obama administration, what they did to even rebrand what war was. So this had been a long time coming. Obama can't take credit for changing the way the United States wages war. That's been a process since the end of the invasion of Vietnam. The more reliance on proxy wars, less reliance on manpower, the attempt to make war more technologically feasible and effective, and and of course profitable. And take away the consequences of war, make it harder for people to see the consequences of war. That didn't start with Obama, but Obama was able to put the nail in the coffin by rebranding what war was. He even said it during his campaign. He said, "Oh, I'm not against all wars. I'm against dumb wars."
Right.
And that became the mantra of a lot of, especially people in the liberal class, who may have been opposed to Bush when he was waging wars, but they had this obsession with Bush being a dumb guy, right? Like that was,
that's
you remember.
It's a great point. I've never heard it articulated that way, but that's a really great point.
Bush is stupid. And so when Obama came, he was smart. And so when he started escalating, surges in Afghanistan, and then of course the Libya debacle, the Ukraine.
Well, that's the thing. We didn't even feel Libya. Like, we didn't even really register that as a war at the time, right?
It wasn't
when it's
even,
exactly.
It wasn't even branded as a war.
Exactly.
Obama said it on record. He said, well, no troops are dying, so doesn't mean it's a war. And that
logic, you could say the same here,
Totally, right? Like, now they're saying, it's a war because Russia is supposedly waging it. But at the same time, how is it a war if the United States isn't sacrificing any troops?
It's not
Ukrainians. Yeah, Ukrainians certainly are in the tens of thousands, now hundreds upon hundreds of thousands in total. But yeah, I think that had a huge effect in maybe undoing. We had a hard time. We already had many challenges before Obama to undo kind of the steeped history of the United States as being a country steeped in war and rooted in war. But then to have someone like Obama to be advertised as this hope and change, and then for him to and his backers, of course, his masters, basically rebrand it so that it was more palatable to a larger section of the population, especially to liberals, that made things more difficult. And then Trump comes along, and the ruling class was very, very, very effective in harping on Trump as being a singular evil. And so when Trump started saying, oh, well, maybe we need to disband NATO, maybe we need to get closer to Russia, regardless of the aims, I certainly believe that, Trump has more of a vendetta against China, and kind of takes the wedge theory that the United States foreign policy establishment has flirted with at certain times in its history to try to divide Russia and China. I believe that's probably in the main true. But when he was just advertising this, and certain elements of the political establishment aligned with Trump started articulating this, well, because he was Putin's puppet and a Russian agent and all this nonsense, that just added on to the Obama effect. And so, I think that's a big reason why it's hard to even question U.S. foreign policy, because regardless of who is in power in the duopoly, regardless of what they say, it all comes back to just accepting what the United States does around the world, even if it's not justifiable anymore. Because I don't think the whole democracy narrative, all of that, I don't think that really sticks as much. But if you don't like the team that is doing it, or maybe you do like the team that's doing it, then you're neutralized nonetheless.
All righty. Thank you for that answer. Very thorough. Cool Blue, thanks for the $4.99. Says loyal Democratic voters are for whatever the party establishment tells them they are for. Blue no matter who is also blue no matter what. All right, so that works. Thank you for the donation. That's a nice segue into this next segment. We'll turn to the domestic politics side here, some presidential speculation for 2024. Here's RFK Jr. on C-SPAN talking about the fact that he's finally catching on to the fact that the Democrats are not going to give him a fair primary. So here he is on C-SPAN talking about that and calling himself 10 times the threat that Bernie Sanders was to the Democratic brass. Here we go.
The Democratic Party, well documented, the Democratic Party put their finger on the scale, their thumbs, their foot on the scale to make sure that Bernie Sanders could not get the nomination. I think if Bernie Sanders had gotten the nomination, we would be in a very different place in our country today. And but there's an antagonism and antipathy within the Democratic Party for people who have true progressive values, people who are challenging the predominance of Wall Street interests of companies like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and the military-industrial complex. You know, the Democratic Party used to be anti-war. It's now at the forefront of promoting these forever wars, which are destroying our country. And so, you know, Bernie Sanders was a threat to that infrastructure, and I am 10 times the threat that Bernie Sanders was. And so I think that there's, you know, they've pulled out all the stops to make sure that that I will not threaten the donor base.
All right, so there's that. And then ABC News reported that at a recent town hall in South Carolina, RFK refused to rule out an independent bid when asked by an audience member if he would consider running on a third-party ticket if the Democrats did indeed, sideline him. Here's his answer. This was only on ABC News, so I could not get clean video of this, but we do have audio that's pretty legible, so we'll take a listen.
You know, they're not hiding anything. They're trying to make sure that I can't participate at all in the political process, and so I'm going to keep all my options open. And I'll know, you know, I'll have to make a decision after the 14th of this month.
By 14th of this month, he means 14th of next month. October 14th is some kind of deadline, apparently. So apparently, if he does decide to switch, it will be within a few weeks. All right, let's play the rest.
President Biden is losing not only to Donald Trump by 3 points, but to every Republican candidate, tying with DeSantis, and the only one he can beat is Vivek. And that's the CNN poll that came out 2 days ago. Oh, and there's poll after poll over the past 2 months, including our private polling, showing him losing to almost every Republican.
Okay, so there's a couple different questions that I have for you about this, Danny. On the wholesale point of RFK being a bigger threat than Sanders, to me, just from a horse race point of view, just these two clips alone make him a bigger threat to the Democratic Party in one sense, which is that unlike Bernie Sanders, there he is making a somewhat, although not so veiled threat as at an independent run, possibly. But also, unlike Bernie Sanders, RFK is willing to say Biden's going to lose. Bernie never said Biden would lose. Bernie never, when they asked Bernie Sanders, could Biden beat Trump? He said, well, yeah, sure he could. You know what I mean? He kept his powder dry in a lot of those key moments. So in at least those two cases, I would have to agree that RFK is at least attempting to pose a bigger threat than Bernie Sanders. He doesn't have nearly the polling support that Bernie had. So in that very literal sense, he's not as big a threat. But in terms of the foreign policy stuff, what is your analysis of that statement? Is he more threatening to the establishment than Bernie was?
Oh, it's a complex question because I think both of them have both major flaws, and of course, both of them, at least during the campaign,
sure,
that they ran, had also elements that went against the grain. You know, Bernie Sanders certainly railed against the military-industrial complex and certainly took various positions on certain issues that were perhaps better than the Democratic Party establishment, while also then, depending on which one it was, would flank to the Democratic Party establishment on those issues.
Right.
So, and we saw how deeply that affected Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2020 when they started to Russiagate him and he couldn't push back. You know, he had no opportunity. He didn't push back one bit. Now, I think RFK Jr. has, it's very different in terms of how it looks, but a very similar problem because on Ukraine, certain issues very good. And then, of course, I know you've covered this, many have covered this, his deep loyalty to Israel is one that is probably so glaring. Bernie Sanders didn't really have that. I mean, Bernie Sanders, you know, we can make quibbles about, oh, is he left enough on Israel?
He
But
more or
at the
less
very
punted
least,
on it. I mean, he said some good things, but he basically punted on it.
Exactly. So, but you know, and we can quibble about, well, is there any difference between that and being deeply loyal? I think in optics, there's a big difference, and also how RFK Jr. has behaved, literally currying Israel lobbyists into his campaign. So there's just deep problems here in terms of whether he's 10 times the threat. I saw someone in the chat say something that I would agree with. 10 times 0 is still 0.
Right.
I would say that, you know, even if he maybe looks more of a threat because of certain positions he takes and because of the things that he said, because I think those are very impactful, you know, to say something like Joe Biden is not going to win. I do think that maybe chalks up more to the situation that we're in than it does to RFK Jr.'s himself as being some kind of threat. Given what he's also said about how he will, you know, support Biden if Biden is a nominee. He's a Democrat. He's promoted himself as a Democrat through and through, at least up until this point. It's hard to believe that his foreign policy agenda will be that much different. It's unclear how.
Well, he has said, I don't mean to cut you off, but he has said in the past that he doesn't think he could endorse someone who supports the war. So he hasn't been as forceful, not nearly as forceful, in fact. In fact, he hasn't really unequivocally stated he will certainly endorse Biden when he loses the nomination. So there is that to just sort of put out there.
No. I think, you know, all these things are significant to a degree. I guess it's just hard for me to believe, given his loyalty to Israel, and also, you know, it doesn't seem like foreign policy is really at the top of his campaign outside of Ukraine. Ukraine is the big hot war,
right? Sure,
and it's true, and it should be in many ways at the top of anyone's campaign that's trying to run an alternative campaign. I wouldn't question that, but I would question, just given what he's done on just that singular question of Israel, how deeply committed he would be to any kind of peace agenda. I was very critical of Bernie Sanders, even at his best moments, that given that he couldn't really go against the grain on the U.S.'s war on Syria and various other, and just the ways in which he refused to take positions outside of the Democratic Party on the specifics of U.S. foreign policy while railing against the budget and all of that, just made it so he would, on the one hand, maybe touch on war fatigue and be effective in that way, while signaling to the establishment that he will play ball. And I think RFK Jr., given the state of electoral politics, does this to a significant degree. And for RFK Jr., for all the things that I could agree with him on, I even see the way he's just running his campaign right now. He's trying to raise as much money as he can with whoever is his friends, and it's difficult to see how in this moment he could really be a candidate that is insurgent to any degree. For me,
certainly not inside the Democratic Party. Certainly not.
No. And he chose that very willingly, and I think Bernie Sanders, that was his main flaw to begin with anyway. I remember when Jill Stein tried to offer him the Green Party nomination, he gave her the bird, essentially. And that, I think, shows the limitations at the end of the day, is that these candidates, if they are truly committed to the Democratic Party, it's hard to take stock in what they say as having any kind of significance should they gain enough support to be a candidate with any kind of viability, even on the debate stage. You know, we can't even get candidates on the debate stage in many ways.
That
third
ship is
party.
sailed. I mean, that's over. That
And the DNC is not going to allow RFK Jr. up there either. So
no, absolutely not. RFK is also hawkish on Iran, which is sort of inconsistent with his policy on Ukraine. Obviously very, very flawed in a number of ways that we've talked about at great length on this show in the past. But I think one of the things that may have him tempted to run independent, and I never thought I'd be saying this, is the fact that, his coalition is kind of amorphous. Like the Bernie coalition was basically progressive Democrats and then some Greens and independents who were further left than the Democratic Party, but it was left. RFK's coalition is very different, which is why he did the border documentary, right? I mean, he has a lot of conservatives in that coalition, which means were he to run as an independent, he'd probably pull fairly equally, I would think, from both major parties, which could make a third-party candidacy of his particularly interesting if he chooses to go there. He's been adamant that he is not considering it for the past several months. Now, changing his tune slightly. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but we won't have to wait and see that long because apparently he said he'll know by mid-month. The other thing is they put this caveat there. Well, if the Democrats screw me, then I'll run third party. Well, what does that mean if the Democrats screw you? Because, look, they would screw him if they had to. They're not going to really have to screw him. I mean, he is polling nowhere close to Joe Biden. So what happens if they say, all right, fine, I guess we'll what? Like, what does it mean to not rig it against you at this point? You want a debate? You can't really get a debate. I mean, Donald Trump won't show up at the debates in the RNC because he has such a great polling lead. He figured, why would I? If the DNC had debates, Biden could say the same thing. Why would I show up at a debate when I'm up by 50 points? So, like, what would the Democrats have to do or not do to actually get him to say, okay, this constitutes rigging, therefore I'm running independent? If you're really serious, you just say I'm running independent anyway. If I lose the nomination, that's it. I'm running independent. And so we haven't quite heard that, but it's interesting that he put that mid-October date out there as the point past which we will know for sure either way.
Yeah, and you bring up many good points. I think that the whole notion that the Democratic Party maybe hasn't rigged it enough for him yet is, it is, I guess, disconcerting. He's trying to run a campaign. It's obvious that he does have. I think you are correct on his. Sorry about that. That's my doorbell for some reason. But he does have that kind of political support across the aisle. I know that there's concern about that among the Democrats, and they should, because the Democrats, the Democrats don't care about what things like we care about, which is, can we, mobilize or get enough people to push this system to the brink and truly make some changes, regardless of the means. For someone like RFK Jr., he's looking to win a campaign. He's looking to get as far as he can as president. And the Democrats should be concerned in the sense that someone like him obviously has more appeal because of the fact that he will take positions that run against the grain from them. And the danger is that he, given his name too, he could build enough political support for at least an impressive looking third party run. It's hard to know what kind of party he would be a part of, though, given his political sentiments at this point. But for me, I think that RFK Jr. is really difficult to trust in any sort of way. I have suspicions about all politicians that are running electorally at this point, and even grassroots ones, given that the pressures of running a campaign, trying to win, and also trying to make it as effective, at this point runs against perhaps the interests of the vast majority of people, because at some point you got to try to find a way to get in and to win, and that really takes a lot of compromising, even for the Green Party to try to get the 5% necessary to get the matching funds and to get on the debate stage. All of that in and of itself is so difficult that it's hard not to make certain compromises to make the campaign as effective as possible. So for RFK Jr., it's hard for me to trust it, given all that, how he has behaved up until this point, and now saying he's going to be maybe going independent. I just don't know how seriously I can take it as something that would move the needle in any kind of significant way for at least the purposes of building a alternative to the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting answer. I mean, we got Cornell polling at around 5 now. You have No Labels threatening to get in. They had a big enrollment drive in Arizona where they registered 15,000 people in their party, which sounds insignificant, but that's actually about Biden's margin of victory there in 2020. So it's not nothing. And on top of that, now, if RFK entered, he would definitely get significant support. And, you've watched our show a bit, and anybody who has knows we are far from RFK stands here. But at the same time, I do support anybody getting in the race just to cause chaos within the system, right? I mean, I think to the extent there's any strategy in 2024, it is to disrupt. And so if Cornel West can disrupt, I wish him well in that endeavor. If the Libertarians put up someone good, I think that'd be great. Even if these No Labels people run somebody, I mean, they would run some scumbag, but so what? Who cares? I'd say the more the merrier. The more support we can extract from the two major parties, that is an opportunity we should not forego. And if RFK ran independent, I think it would be great. I think he'd have a lot of crossover appeal. I think he'd get a lot of support. And just how great would it be on election night to see 5 candidates, with significant vote totals instead of 2? I mean, I think it would be
a disaster for the elites. That's for sure.
Exactly. So, I think in that respect, it's worth it.
Yeah, totally. I think and this is going to come. I don't know if it's going to come in this election cycle, but it's obvious just with Cornel West, RFK Jr., the fact that there is now, and despite all of the contradictions of all of their campaigns, it is now looking like the whole Bernie Sanders strategy that's kind of died. There's not going to be any kind of hope that there will be this one individual who will bring together all the disaffected Democrats and push forward, push through, and make a significant challenge to the Democratic Party establishment. That's not going to happen. So now it is looking more like we're going to see more and more efforts to break basically the duopoly into as many pieces as possible, which could then, I agree with this, so it definitely could lead to a more favorable terrain to have real, and I think this is the problem that we're facing now, especially in the political, even just discourse, but organized, forget it. It's just, how do we have genuine conversations and debates that can move things forward so we can have a coherent, quote unquote, left? Like if we're going to be a left, how can we be coherent and united on issues that we need to be united around, while also continue to have debates on issues that perhaps we're not going to find unity on now? How do we build that kind of movement? And we can't do that if we're always having to harken back, because so many people harken back to their, to their instincts to just support whichever duopoly party they need to hold their nose for, regardless of if it's Democrats or Trump, GOP, whatever. There are significant numbers of people in the United States that simply just do that, of course, excluding the Democratic Party loyalists, the GOP loyalists, and even Trump loyalists, who are not all the most rational people, contrary to maybe some public opinion. There are many people who just vote for Trump because of Trump, who just vote GOP because it's the team they play ball for. It's really those folks who are holding their nose that we need to reach. And that's enough people, I think, to make a significant difference. So any way to break that up, to split people's sentiments and loyalties to alternative vehicles is a good thing, and will allow for then a real debate to happen on, well, what does an alternative really look like? Because I don't think it should look libertarian. I don't think it should look like RFK Jr. I don't think I don't think it should look even like the Green Party, as much as I align with the Green Party on many issues. But if there can be more of a base of people who are considering those options, then we can truly have it out on what it should really look like as a united kind of movement.
All right. We're going to take some super chats before we let you go, Danny. We'll take some questions. There's some questions for you in here. Corey Weichman, question for Danny. How often do you think about the Roman Empire? Yeah, we did a segment on
so
that
funny.
trend.
Well, my wife brought up this this article, I guess, about a poll or something. I don't know
It's
the
a TikTok trend.
details.
So there have been articles
Tik-
written about a
right,
TikTok
right.
trend where women go to their significant others and ask them, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And surprisingly, a lot of men think about it a lot often than you might think.
Yeah.
A lot more often. Than you might think.
Yeah, that's well, it's funny because when I heard about this, I was just like, really? People think about this? I mean, I just I guess the answer is I don't think about it at all, really.
Yeah, me
Although,
neither.
of course, there are many people who we may listen to who, sometimes like in the fall of the American Empire or the fall of the Roman Empire. But even those comparisons I find to be it's just the history. It's so detached that it's even hard for me. Like outside of making that statement, it's hard to even talk about that. Like it's like, oh yeah, well, how did the Roman Empire really fall? What was life really like in the Roman? What was the world really like under the Roman Empire? It's just so different that I don't even find it that useful. But I do find it funny. I don't really understand why that would be the case. At this point, it's actually surprising given how intellectual most men are. And
It could be the only history they know. So when they think
yeah,
about history,
hey,
it's
maybe
Rome.
they remember their world history classes or something. As Roman Empire does get quite a bit of focus, but it is funny though. It is
a
funny
marquee item, yes, indeed.
TikTok is a hellscape though, so I try to stay away from that.
Yeah, us too. Rory, thanks for the $7.99 follow-up point. I guess China and Russia controlling the Baltic oil supply and Europe gas supply is not in the interest of the U.S. or any other free market. I think that was in response to what Danny said earlier.
Yeah, no, true. It is true. No concessions there though. But yeah.
Beautiful. See, you tried to bait him into an argument and you failed. He didn't
I did.
But thank you for the donation. Appreciate it. Pat Donahue, thank you, my friend. Up the workers. Thank you for the donation, my friend. Appreciate that. Just troubleshooting. Thank you, Samuel. Bruce works okay. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much for the donation. Appreciate that. All right, we got a few more here. Left Less, thanks for the $5. Not funding our government, people, and infrastructure. Going deeper into debt with inflation isn't strength. Shows a weak country with shitty values. Well, that's the angle that the Republicans are going to attack this from. That's the angle that apparently the Polish right is attacking it from. And yes, that's a very potent message. Absolutely. Tyler, thanks for the $5. I was up early enough this morning for the show, but totally forgot. Oh, well, now I get to listen while at work. Hope everyone has a good weekend. Well, thank you, Tyler. And yes, remember, everybody, Friday mornings, 9 a.m. We call it the Morning Dew edition. Here we go. Andre Johnstone. Even though Trump had hawkish trade relations with China, hey, Danny, do you agree he didn't follow through on Pompeo's claim of a genocide in Xinjiang? I hope I said that right. You would know. Did I get it right or no?
I think it's pronounced Xinjiang. But,
Xinjiang.
close.
Okay, sorry about that. Close enough.
No.
Glad I had you here.
No worries. I'm probably saying it wrong too because I can't get the pronunciation of the of how the Chinese would say Xin. But yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. Trump was certainly hawkish on China rhetorically. I think his policies, of course, were hawkish in many ways in many different areas. On this particular one, though, he didn't really, and I think he was smart. I think Trump was just like the Bush era, Bush Jr., so stupid. Trump, of course, got a lot of this from liberals. I actually think Trump is a lot smarter than a lot of people give him credit for. And I think he was very smart to kind of keep a distance rhetorically on this issue. You know, Congress, Republicans, and Democrats, they were doing their thing on Xinjiang. They were formulating sanctions packages, constant media blitz, propaganda war, all of that was happening, and Trump certainly wasn't opposing it. But yes, rhetorically, it's not like he was giving the issue a huge kind of platform for himself. And, you know, and I think it would be hard for him to do that, to be frank, as well, given that he positioned himself also as let's say, the strong borders where, there are these nasty people everywhere that we need to protect America from, it would be hard to then say, oh, well, those poor Muslims in Xinjiang, right? It'd be hard for me to imagine him saying, oh, those poor people in Xinjiang, we need to like help them. That wasn't his brand. His brand wasn't humanitarian interventionist. That's
Right.
what the Uyghur situation was all about. If he were to have done that, he would have looked a little bit more like his opponents than I think he would have liked himself to look. But at the same time, it's not as if the Xinjiang issue it needed him, for example, to do a whole lot around it to damage the psyche of the American public while also building up a Cold War on China around this, even just a singular issue that was, of course, bogus on its face, but very effective in especially garnering more and more love to build on the Obama effect, to build on the Democratic Party's kind of historic role now as the more effective warmongering party. The Xinjiang issue certainly mobilized and galvanized a whole lot of people to look at China in this very particular way, which allowed for people to hold on to like human rights as the thing that they can feel good about, while of course going along with the warmongers' agenda on China.
All right, here's another one from Andre. Danny, could you link DD to guests like Brian Burlington, Carl Duran, Ronna Calix, Sarah Jansen to be guests on Due Dissonance? Well, no pressure. I promise Andre is not a plant. He's not a plant.
No, but I'm certainly no. But most of those guys focus on geopolitics in particular, as I'm doing mostly now. But if you ever wanted to, yeah, I could definitely make the connection there. Most of those folks are down to go anywhere. So. Cool. No pressure, but yeah, of course.
Gotcha.
I can make the links.
Eric Rousseau, thanks for the $5. I like this one. The Roman Empire gave bread and circus to distract the plebiscites. All Americans get is circus. That's right. We don't even get bread and circus.
Yeah.
We just get circuses. No bread. Indeed.
Right.
Danny, thank you so much for being here this morning. Before you leave, do you want to get some plugs in? Tell people where they can follow you and get in touch with you and support your work.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on the program. It's been great. It's been fun. Yeah, so you can follow me on YouTube. Just search my name, Danny Haifong. Easy enough. You can subscribe to me there. I do regular streams. Now I'm focusing mostly on Ukraine, NATO, Russia, and of course a heavy dose of China and whatever foreign policy. I've done some stuff on Niger, Africa, whatever foreign policy question is kind of hot. I'm trying to tackle, although the Armenia situation, that was rough. That was a hard thing to just catch up to speed with. But, I basically focus on global developments. And so if you're interested, definitely subscribe there. You can find me on social media. I'm not so much promoting X anymore, formerly known as Twitter. It's hard to keep up with that platform, but you can follow me there at my name. And also my handle is at Spirit of Ho, Spirit of, that's H-O, and all one word. And Telegram, I say if people follow me on Telegram, t.me/my name, Danny Haifong, all one word. That's my kind of backup. And I do a little bit more posting there these days. And then, of course, if you can support my work, you can find me on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Danny Haifong, just one word. And you can find all the ways to support me as well on my YouTube channel. So those are, I think, the best places to support. But yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been fun. And yeah, shaking off a little bit of rust on some of these domestic issues, which, at this point, it's tough. There's an election season that's already underway, of course, and these times can be the most miserable, but they're also the most dynamic in terms of what people are thinking about. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Danny Haifong, thank you so much. It was great to meet you. I hope to have you on again sometime soon, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
All righty. Bye-bye. Danny Haifong, everybody. We have another guest who is waiting in the wings here, who you're not going to want to miss. I'm going to admit her in just a second, but Yassine Miller, thanks for the $5. Do you guys read Patreon private messages? Left a message last week, not received a response. Just curious. Thanks. Yeah, I do try to read all these messages. Patreon updated their app a few weeks ago, and I used to get push notifications whenever anything came in on Patreon. I haven't been getting them, so maybe I should just reset that, because then I'll get Patreon messages just like texts, and I can respond back. So I'll try tweaking the settings there, but I will look into it as soon as I get done here. So thank you very much, and I will definitely check you out and right back. Alrighty, let's go to another very special guest. You all know her, who just got back from quite the trip, and I'm actually very glad you called in because I followed up with you on Facebook, and now you are finally back home, safe from Morocco. Ellen Jimerson, how's it going, Ellen? So you were in Morocco when the earthquake hit. It was a nightmare getting back, and then the cherry on top was you apparently caught COVID on the flight back, or on the way back.
I had as we were pulling into Charles de Gaulle Airport, I had an onslaught of a terrible GI problem, vomiting and diarrhea. So that laid me low. We had to stay at the Sheraton at the airport for 3 nights. And I got back to Alabama finally and thought I'd check in with my doctor just to see what he thought. They tested me for COVID. So apparently, while I had the GI bug, I also had COVID. I feel horrible. In fact, I look like a ghost.
Well, you look a little pale. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say it, but now that you mentioned it, I mean, you don't look bad. You don't look bad, but you look pale. You look spent.
Yeah, I'm spent. Yes. But I wanted to check in and just say how much it meant to me that you mentioned me and the fact that I was in Morocco when the earthquake hit in the email you sent out. That was very, very kind of you.
Oh, of course.
And it meant a lot to me.
Yeah, we sent that out on the Substack. So, by the way, if you want to get those emails and those messages, join the Substack.
Mm-hmm. So now I'm just, it was the vacation from hell.
Yeah, it was wild. You know, you mentioned, because I remember in one of our streams going back a few weeks, you mentioned 100 degrees in Morocco now, because it was cool up in New York. And so you mentioned 100 degrees in Morocco. And I registered that. I said, okay. And then when the earthquake hit, I'm like, wait a minute. Is she in Morocco? And then Russell told me immediately after it occurred to me that, yes, you were there. And so, yeah, that's why we put that little email blast out.
The earthquake happened the first night we were there.
Wow. Oh, man. Man. So were you there? Was it the night of that stream? Because you must have been flying. So it must have been a couple of days before that you mentioned the weather in Morocco or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. No,
okay.
I had been Googling it, trying to figure out what to take and everything.
Right.
So,
you were stuck there for a while. Then you took a flight to Paris, and then Paris to Detroit, and then Detroit to Alabama?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We had planned to go to Paris and then go to Madrid.
Right.
And hang out in Madrid for a few days. But I mean, I couldn't get out of the hotel room. That was horrible.
Yeah. When I had COVID, the symptoms were very strange. It was very strange. I had like 1 day of sore throat, and then the sore throat was gone. 1 day of coughing, then the coughing was gone. 1 day, just a little, fatigue. Then for 4 days, I was totally fine. I'm figuring, all right, I'm done with that. I got lucky. And then boom, on like the 7th day, I was out. I mean, it was some of the sickest I've ever been, but out of nowhere, like I had recovered for 4 days, and then bang. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I was just completely out of commission, all kinds of stuff going on, headache, it was, but then the next day, all that was gone too. It's not like that lasted that long. It was very, very strange, but
one of the interesting things to me was that, and I've never experienced this before, at Charles de Gaulle, they have an infirmary. So I crawled my way to the infirmary and saw a couple of nurses and a doctor and got IV fluids.
Oh, well, that's
And then they gave me some
convenient
prescriptions. My sister walks down to the pharmacy. She walks in with the prescriptions, and she's got the prescriptions, and she's out of there in 90 seconds.
Wow.
It was just
wow. Look at
crazy.
that. Yeah, that's wild. That's wild. Robbie says, I look whiter than Ellen. Well, Ellen is in Alabama, and I'm up here in northern New York. So, you know, even sick or not, you still get more of that vitamin D down there than I get up here this time of year. And I've had a sick kid the past few weeks, so I've been inside a lot too. So I have not gotten much sun
Both
either.
your kids have been
They both had a bout of looks like Kawasaki. They both had Kawasaki, which is very, very rare. But we have a follow up with the cardio next week to see if there were any lingering effects. Which hopefully, knock on wood, there aren't.
Well, I don't need to come on here. Just
no, it's all right. Thanks for calling in and being a sport, and hope you feel better soon. Obviously,
thank you.
But yeah, but glad you're home at least, because that's the best place to be when you're feeling under the weather, and so
yeah.
That's excellent. So keep in touch, Ellen. Please do. And best wishes. Let's everybody give Ellen our best in the chat here. Have about some hearts on the chat for Ellen.
That's
nice. And please keep us updated with how everything's going.
I will.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Be well. We'll be in touch. Alrighty, folks. Well, that is our show today. Once again, if you go to patreon.com/DoDissidents, you can support our program here. Our next patron stream is rescheduled from this Saturday to Monday nights. The reason for that is because Russell is out in a place with a pretty lousy Wi-Fi, but he will be back on mainland Greece by Sunday for our show. And then we'll do the Patreon show on Monday night. So that's Monday the 25th, it looks like, probably 8 p.m. But we'll confirm that Sunday. But yes, Patreon supporters and paid Substack subscribers get a shout out on the show. They also get call-in access. Ellen is obviously a Patreon member. And you also get access to patron and paid Substack exclusive live stream shows. Those are uncensored shows over on Rumble. Those are a lot of fun, and so we always look forward to doing those. We've had a couple of false schedulings between my kid being sick and Russell being out of the country, but we will get them in before the end of the month, we promise. So thank you guys all very much for being here this morning. We want to thank Danny Haifong for being a wonderful guest, as we knew he would be, and we want to thank Ellen for calling in and checking in with us. Thank you guys very much. We will see you guys back here on the main channel Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern at our regularly scheduled time slot with our regular co-host and partner, Russell Dibular, of course. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Thanks to Danny. Thanks to Ellen. Thanks you all. We will see you on Sunday night. In the meantime, please do be safe and be well.
Please clap.